Yes. So good evening. This is the third meeting we are having, right? This is the third of the four sessions that we had planned to have on prelim strategy. The first session was 2 weeks ago, where I discussed the overall details of the strategy with you, and the second session was on 11th, which was last Saturday, where we spent almost 1 hour 45 minutes going through various previous questions where we implement the strategy, because discussing this strategy is of limited use if you do not know how to implement it, how to apply it in a real examination context. So, in the last week, last Saturday, we spent some time looking at a few questions. This week, this session, we will not have a marathon session like we had in the last week. This week, we will keep it short, maybe 1 hour to 1 hour 15 minutes, maybe. So, in this session today, I want to carry forward the approach which we had taken in the last session to a 2019 paper. So, in this session and in the next session, that is the last session which we have next week, I am planning to take 2019 and 2020, the last 2 year papers, and see how we can identify some broad trends and see how we can implement the strategy that we have discussed on these two papers, right? So today we will take up 2019 paper, but before that I think there were 2 or 3 questions that were pending in the previous handout. Some students have requested for those things, so I will just quickly cover those 3 questions from the previous session, and then we will spend a good amount of time looking at the 2019 paper and what are the latest trends. In specific, I will try to analyze the trends in economy section and history section in this session. In the next session, we will look at other sections like environment, polity, S&T, and government schemes. So in this session today, we will try to focus on primarily the trends in economy, trends in history, because in last 2 years, a good majority of questions have come from here. In history, in 2020, there were about 20 questions just from history paper, just from history section. In economy, you usually expect 20 to 25, somewhere around 20, 23. That's the usual trend which has been retained. But history got a huge push. There was a sudden spike in history questions indicating the importance of history in both 19 as well as 20 papers. So we will discuss those trends today. But before that, let us summarize what we have done in the last two sessions. So what is the strategy that we have been discussing? We have I'm not here to discuss any content with you, right? We have not discussed any content. This session is not about academic or subject content. These sessions are about how do we, assuming that you all have content, we are saying in the way prelims paper is being set over the last 3 to 4 years, our hypothesis is that just content alone is not helping students perform in the examination. Over and above the content, students also have to develop some technique, a prelims technique. Some call it prelims technique, some call it MCQ technique, other call it elimination technique. So the elimination technique is in fact helping students do well in the examination. And we took the case of how some students are clearing prelims effortlessly, whereas others are finding prelims to be a very big hurdle to cross. And what is the difference? The difference has to do with this elimination technique. And what is this elimination technique? Here we said students' approach to prelims must be that it is not about finding the right option as much as trying to eliminate wrong options. So the mindset that students must have to prelims paper is to, whenever options are given to you, try to eliminate as many options as possible. And after you eliminate enough number of options, you will eventually land with the right answer. So the key is to eliminate options. And to eliminate these options, we said we have to learn to apply the knowledge. You would have gathered so much knowledge over the course of your preparation across different subjects. Now, the challenge is to apply that knowledge to the question's context. So, the question would be about something very unusual, something maybe you must have not even heard about. But are you willing to apply first common sense and use churn and distill all the knowledge and scan through the knowledge that you have and identify some piece of logic which will help you eliminate. So it is about using common sense, seeing the options, seeing the structure of the options, and applying the knowledge that we have gathered through our preparation to the question's context. Using all these methods, you have to learn to apply. You have to learn to apply your knowledge, develop some logic. This application of knowledge involves developing some logic based on the information you have, and using that logic, you must learn to eliminate. This is the attitude we must have towards prelims. This is a very important attitude piece. Mains is a different ball game, but in prelims, this attitude, this approach to the paper is very, very important. And what is the best way to develop this approach, this attitude? There, we said previous year questions have a very big role to play. That is what we said in over the last two sessions. Because prelims papers are set every year probably by an in-house team within UPSC. So UPSC uses some kind of common toolkits to see they are focusing in each subject, they are focusing in certain areas. And after identifying the areas, the way they are framing right option, the way they frame wrong option, there is a pattern to all that. So there is a pattern to prelims papers. Now, by repeatedly spending time with previous year papers, we get to understand in a given subject, what are the areas they're focusing on? If it is history, where is the focus? Medieval or modern? If it is economy, where is the focus? Agriculture, banking, or is it about external sector? So where is the focus? Next, given the focus area, how are they framing questions? Are they asking straightforward questions? Are they asking chronology? Are they asking comparative questions? Are they asking factual questions? So, focus areas and next the nature of questions also becomes evident to us. And then, third, by spending time with previous papers, we learn to identify the right option, how a right option is framed, how a wrong option is framed. We tend to develop that insight into UPSC's paper setters mindset. All of this is what we are referring to as some intuition. You will develop an intuition towards the paper. So when you are looking at the paper and you're spending time on the paper and trying to eliminate, this intuition will help you decide. Let us say you have eliminated two options and you're divided between option A, option C. Having this intuition that you have developed with previous year papers will now help you maybe choose A or C. You should not just choose based on your whims and fancies. You must learn to make a informed guess. And that intuition that you have developed by practicing multiple UPSC previous prelims questions helps you move closer towards the right option. This is what we have said. And we have also discussed in the last session how you should approach the paper. There I said, please, in prelims, risk taking is necessary, please. So risk students who take risks are those who are being rewarded, because even after a lot of preparation, there may be only about 30-35 questions which you know fully well. The next 30-35 questions that you need to get right, you will not know them fully well. Yet you must be able to answer them. So it is this ability of students who are clearing are those who are comfortable in answering questions where they are not fully, where they don't know the full information. Where even students who are clearing are those who are able to comfortably answer questions where they have some information deficit and they're still able to take an educated guess. So that skill is becoming very, very importantly. So please keep this in mind. So there I said, when you get the paper, in the first 1 hour or maybe first 65 to 70 minutes, try to finish one round of paper. Try to scan the whole paper and see. Divide the whole paper into questions that you know for sure, questions that you know somewhat, questions that you don't know at all. So what you know for sure, mark them on the OMR in the first round itself. What you think you should not at all touch, you have no idea, just cross them off. Don't spend time on them ever. Now, after these two, there is a middle category where you know something somewhat, where you have some idea, but you're not fully sure. There will be about some 30 to 35 questions of that category. In the next round, after finishing one full coverage in the first 65-70 minutes, the next 50 minutes should be spent on doing second round, third round. Revisit these questions. Your mind works better not when you spend 10 minutes on one question, but instead spend 2 minutes over 3 iterations. When you spend those 2 to 3 minutes multiple times after giving breaks over 2 to 3 rounds, there you will be able, your mind will come up with some new logic, some new idea, some new insight which will help you eliminate. So that is the strategy I suggest. That is, take risks, attempt more number of questions, and second, try to do at least 3 coverages for the paper. Try to do in 2 hours, try to cover the whole paper at least 3 times. Don't take 2 hours to just finish one round. Be quick. Just for the first round, identify questions that you know for sure, answer them. Go through the whole paper, and for the questions that you don't fully know, at least eliminate 1 or 2 options in the first round. Don't have to answer them, but at least eliminate 1 or 2 options. And identify questions that you're not going to touch at all. Some questions you know for sure they're highly factual, and there is no way you can even take a guess. So just rule out those questions so that in your second and third rounds, you're not wasting your precious time on those questions. To do this for exercise in the first 65-70 minutes, and the next 50 minutes is all about trying to increase your accuracy, trying to build on your score. That should be the approach. So these are the broad set of ideas which we have discussed over the last 2 sessions. And in the last session, we took some questions where we showed how these ideas actually work in real time, how these ideas work in a real-time examination context. And we saw some questions, and we saw how we can apply logic and common sense to many questions that we think that are difficult. Even if a question is completely unknown to you, you should not just ignore it. Just read the question and see if there is something you can do about it. Don't look at the question, and if there is some idea, some scheme, some program that you have no idea about, don't just ignore. See if your common sense, see if your broad spectrum of knowledge will help you in those questions. So no question should be left unexamined. As Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living. So in our exam, there is no question that is not worth examining. So every question must be examined by you to see, even if you don't know the question, you must learn to see if you can identify, you can attempt it or not. Sometimes the question is totally unknown, but the options are framed in such an easy manner that if you apply some common sense thinking, you will get the answer. So it is not about whether you know the question fully well or not. It is about whether you are able to eliminate smartly to answer it or not. That is also very, very important. So if you don't know something, don't just move on. Spend time and see if you can attempt the question, even if you don't fully know the options and answers. That is what we discussed. And we also showed how occasionally UPSC also repeats questions word to word. We saw 2 questions, one on history on Buddha's life, the other on economy about handling deficits. How 2 questions were repeated word to word in 2 successive years. So what is the lesson? Spend time on the immediate previous year. So all of you should be spending time on 2020 paper, trying to understand how the paper was set. And soon UPSC will also, after the result, is announced maybe by the month end, they will also put up the official key on the website. So use the official key that they have uploaded on the website to find answers for questions where the coaching institute's key is not final, where the coaching institute's key is not really true, is not really clear. Refer to the final key that UPSC puts up to understand what position they have taken. So stick to the previous questions, use their keys. Now, on that note, let us continue to look at the handout that we discussed here in the last session. Three questions were pending which I did not discuss. I will first discuss them, and next I will take up today's 2019's paper for discussion after we finish those three questions, right? So let us now move on to the three questions that were pending from the previous session. So I didn't discuss this question. Please take a look at this question and see if you can answer this. How do you think you would answer this? So for the purpose of demonstration, I have intentionally taken questions which are not straightforward, questions which are conventionally perceived as difficult questions, just to make a point that you should not ignore any question. So please look at this question and see if you can answer this. Yes, what do you think? What is the first step in answering any question? As we discussed in the previous session, first identify the keyword in the question. What is the question about? This question seems to be about some tax called as equalization levy. This whole question is about some equalization levy. What is this equalization levy on? What is this equalization levy on? Equalization levy is on online advertisements and services. It is a tax that is levied on online advertisement services. That is the question about. Now they have given two features about this question, two features about this tax. What are those two features? First, it is introduced as part of IT Act. Now, would you think this is true? Just look at the question. What is this tax? This is some equalization tax on online advertisement services. So clearly, this is a indirect tax. It is not a direct tax. So why will Income Tax Act have some taxation on online advertisement services? Isn't it? So income tax is about personal people's income, or it may include some provisions of corporate income tax. It may not include GST or sales tax or VAT. All of these are on goods services, which will not be part of income tax. They'll be part of GST, that division. So clearly, option 1 must be wrong. Option 1 doesn't make sense. Now, if you eliminate option 1, which options do you eliminate? A is wrong, and both these two are ruled out. Next, look at the second option. What is the second option saying? It is saying non-resident entities that offer advertisement services in India can claim this is about tax credit. So the keyword in this option is tax credit. So some companies which are offering the service in India, they can claim a tax credit in their home country under double taxation avoidance agreement. This is called as DTAA. You must have all read about this in news. It is frequently in news along with GST, something called as DTAA, double taxation avoidance agreement. This is sometimes frequently in news. So does this option make sense? Why will some companies which offer this service in India, how can they claim tax credit in their countries? According to this, if there is a US ad company, if the US ad company is advertising in India, this option is saying they can claim a credit in USA, in their home country under DTAA. Why will US give a tax credit for a tax this company paid in India? Do India and USA have some tax refund arrangements? Tax is a sovereign function. The tax India collects, Indian government collects, at the most can be refunded by the Indian government. How will US government give a refund for a tax that is collected by Indian government? That just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. So definitely this is also not true, which means the answer is going to be D, neither one nor two. So very simple common sense. You didn't have to even know any details about the equalization tax. You just had to know some basic information about the nature of taxes in India. Once you knew the nature of taxes in India, you could answer this question. There was no need for knowing the specific information related to equalization tax. Next, 14th. Look at this question. See if you can answer this. Yes, what do you think? Have you arrived at an answer? If you have arrived, let us see if your answer is in alignment with our approach. First, what is this scheme again about? What is this question about? It is about a scheme called as PM Kaushal Vikas Yojana, PMKVY. What is Kaushal about? Kaushal is about skill development. So the scheme is about skill development. Kaushal means skills. So this is the Government of India's flagship skill development scheme. It's also called as Skill India. It is in alignment with Skill India mission. So with reference to that Skill India mission or skills mission, some three features have been given. First, it's a flagship scheme of Ministry of Labor and Employment. So there is some ministry which implements it. What is the ministry? Labor and Employment. Now, do you think this is true? This is definitely not true because when NDA government came in 2014, one of their primary goals was to improve the reach of skill development in India. And to fulfill that goal, they had set up a dedicated ministry for skill development. Ministry of Skill Development was set up with the exclusive mission of providing skills. So it is under a Ministry of Skill Development, not labor and employment. So one should definitely not be part of any option. Now look at the options. Having eliminated, now that you know one of the points is false, see if you can eliminate some options. So if one is wrong, A is wrong, B is wrong. You're left with BC. Among B and C, 2 is common, which means 2 is definitely right. 2 has to be right. Now the issue is whether 3 is right or not. So what is 2 saying? Among other things, it also imparts training in soft skills, entrepreneurship, financial and digital literacy. It seems to make sense. Next. What is third? It aims to align the competencies of the unregulated workforce of the country to the national skill qualification framework. This seems to make sense, don't you think? Any skill mission should have some tangible outcomes. And here they're saying the outcome is to give them some skills which are in alignment with the NSQF, the National Skill Qualification Framework. So most likely the option will be C, 2 and 3, which happens to be the right answer. So you just think in a logical style. Just use logical thinking to eliminate options. So I might even go to the extent of saying GS1 paper to a large extent also calls for good reading comprehension skills. So how well you can look at a question, see the keyword, see the options, and see what all the question is about. So in a way, it is also a good exercise in all the 100 questions are in a way an exercise in reading comprehension issue. Next, the last topic here, 16th question, which we did not discuss in the last session. Please go through this. Yes, what do you think? What is this question all about? It is about some global alliance. What is this global alliance for? It is for climate smart agriculture. Climate smart agriculture is a issue. It is one of the focuses of adapting. It is a part of adaptation strategy to climate change. Now, on this issue, on this GACSA, which is a global alliance for climate smart agriculture, we have three options. What are the three options? First, it is saying GACA is an outcome of the Paris Summit. Now, this is not true for anybody who prepared for Paris Summit. You will notice that the key development of Paris Summit is the climate agreement, and one of the key outcome was in the reference to India. One of the key outcome was creation of this International Solar Alliance (ISA). It was not GACSA; it was ISA, International Solar Alliance. That was the key outcome that emerged from climate summit, and India played a very big role in the formation of International Solar Alliance. But with regard to climate smart agriculture, we had nothing significant at Paris summit. So definitely one is wrong. If one is wrong, we are only left with B and C. Of B and C, 2 seems to be right again. 2 seems to be right again. Do you see a pattern again? So this question, the options have also been framed just like the previous one. So now we have to, it is all about whether 3 is right or not. The question reduces to whether option 3 is right or not. What does it say? India is instrumental in the creation of GACSA. Now, with regard to International Solar Alliance, India played a very important role. It was very much in the news, and you would be aware of it. But regarding this, we are not sure. Now, let us think. Climate smart agriculture is a priority for developed countries. For developing countries like India, we are still at the stage of improving productivity and achieving crop diversification. After we have achieved these two goals, then comes the next level goal, that is trying to go for climate smart agriculture. Climate smart agriculture is a very advanced goal. It does not start at the very beginning itself. So for some country like India, which is still a developing country, which is a middle income country, climate smart agriculture is a far fetched issue. So why would India be very instrumental in this? India would be instrumental in uh, issues on agriculture related to food security, issues related to improving productivity, issues related to increasing oil seeds acreage. These are issues for Indian agriculture. Climate smart agriculture is still far away. So 3 does seems to not make sense, which means the answer tends to be only B. So this is how we can look at these questions. Somebody, there is a disturbance, please. Please mute yourself. Sunil sir, who is this? Yeah. Now, let us move on to 2019 paper. Now, we will focus on how questions were asked in 2019 paper, and in the next session, I'll focus on 20 paper. Since these are the two most recent papers that we have for analysis, we will dedicate this session for 19 and then we will go for 20. So let us see how questions have been asked in 2019 first. Here we have certain trends in history section and economy section, which we will discuss as we get there. So I want to highlight certain trends in questions that are being asked in history and economy section. So we will try to observe what those trends are so that we can be better prepared if those trends repeat again in 2021. Look at this question. How would you answer this question? Sunil sir, please see there is some disturbance. I think one student has not muted himself.
I muted him, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Yes, what do you think about this question? Now, if you have prepared various waste related issues, which is not a very primary topic in environment section, you may be able to answer this. Otherwise, you will have difficulty in answering this, right? But is it really so? Let us examine it. What is this question about? This question was asked in 19 and it was about some specific issue. The specific issue that is important here is the principle called extended producer responsibility, EPR. It is about a specific concept called as extended producer responsibility, which means those in waste management, in handling waste, the producers of the waste should have certain role. That seems to be the idea. Now, which of these rules will have that principle? Look at these rules. EPR is a very recent idea that producers must take responsibility for the waste that is emanating from their production. If you are producing a certain goods, now if that is ultimately ending up in waste, as a producer, you must have some responsibility towards that waste. This idea is very new. So it is definitely not there in the 1998 and 1999 because at that time climate change, environment were not so much in focus. 98, 99 were too old. So these two are two, they do not make sense because EPR is a very recent policy development and 98, 99 are too old. So A and B are ruled out. We are left with C and D. What is C about? C is about e-waste management. C is about e-waste management. Now, e-waste management seems to make sense. There is some waste management and EPR is about that. What is D? D is about food safety and standard regulations. Come on. That doesn't make sense, is it? Does it make any sense? Why will EPR is related to waste management? It can be solid waste, e-waste, or it could be any other hazardous waste. Why will it be food safety? So food safety is definitely not the right choice. In fact, it is part of e-waste management rules. They for the first time introduced this concept after e-waste rules brought in this concept. Other rules like biomedical waste rules, which came in 2016, not 1998. In 2016, a new set of rules came in, and those rules also had EPR concept, EPR philosophy. So by just looking at the dates and by saying in which era could something like EPR be possible, you can get the answer. Food safety is out, not at all related. So the others are biomedical waste, plastic waste, and e-waste. Of those, biomedical waste and plastic waste are 98 and 99 rules. Definitely, it was too old at that time to give importance to something like this. So e-waste could be the answer. Next, look at this question. These are not factual questions, but these are analytical questions. This is a very good question. They're concept-based questions. Please look at this. If you know the concept, it's very, very easy. So you must know the answer now. It's a very easy question. If you know what is social capital, you must have prepared this issue of social capital must have been discussed or you must have studied this in the context of GS2, right? Development, role of development and development industry. Study when you're studying NGOs or SHGs, especially you must have come across social capital. In fact, second ARC has even made a report. It is the sixth or seventh report called as social capital. So what is social capital all about? Social capital is about the amount of cooperation that you have in the society. So definitely social capital is not the proportion of literates. It is not the stock of buildings. This is physical capital. It is not size of population, but It is the mutual trust and harmony in society. So it's a very simple question if you knew the concept. Now, why did I use this question as an example? Just to point out to you that in 2018, they have asked a very similar question. So in 2018 also, they have asked a similar question. So this was asked in 19, social capital was asked in 19, but in 18 also they have asked a very similar question. So you see now, this is what I mean by focusing on previous papers. You will see the trends. You will see that there is some amount of continuity from one year to the other, and you should not lose out on that continuity. Students who give importance to the previous papers are in touch with that continuity in the paper settled. So let us say in 18 you wrote the 18 exam and you got this answer wrong. So what should you do when you're preparing for 19? You should go back to 18, identify questions which you got wrong, and study the related topics. So if you got a question on human capital wrong in 18, in 19 when you're preparing, you must identify this question and you should read up on your in economy. You should go back and read up on issues around human capital, so that if a question comes from that topic again, you should be able to answer it. You should not make the same mistake twice. So look at this question. So while the previous question was about social capital, this question is about human capital. So what is your understanding of human capital? Is it one? Look at one. Individuals of a country to accumulate more capital. This is saying that people become rich. Where people become rich, that doesn't increase human capital. Human capital is about people attaining skills, people attaining education, knowledge. That is human capital. So one is definitely wrong. If one is wrong, you are left with which options? B and C. Here, 2 is there, which means 2 is definitely right. There is increase in knowledge, skill levels, and capacities of people of the country. Now, again, the question is about whether 4 is right or not. 4 is saying accumulation of intangible wealth. Of course, it is intangible wealth. Tangible wealth, so 1 and 3 are related. 1 and 3 are same. That is accumulation of money, where cars, buildings, etc. This is tangible wealth. So 1 and 3 are same. But 4 is and 2 are similar. Knowledge, skills, and capacities are definitely, they are intangible wealth. They are intangible wealth. So 4 seems to make sense. So the answer is C, 2 and 4. So what my intention behind giving this question to you is to show that continuity between one year and the other. So sometimes the exact question can repeat itself, or in other times a very similar question or a question from the similar area can reappear in the next year, and then you should not lose out such questions. You should definitely get them right. Now this is another easy question. So these are all application oriented questions. At one point of time, they used to ask questions directly. What is article so and so? Now they're asking analytical questions. In polity, this trend is increasing. They're asking questions from political theory. What do you understand by liberty? What is positive liberty? What is negative liberty? They're asking these kind of questions. So look at this question. It's a very easy question, right? I hope you got it right. So I'm not going to discuss this in detail. So it is about right to marry the person of one's choice. What is the answer? Now, to answer this question, you should have what is right to marry? Right to marry is about this is about liberty, isn't it? Right to marry is about liberty. In our fundamental rights, we have two sets of rights. Liberty related rights are one set, then there are equality related rights. 14 to 18, these are about equality. 19 to 22, these are about liberty. So 25 onwards, they are cultural rights, cultural and social rights. So this is how you should understand fundamental rights. So 25, 29 definitely not the answer because these are cultural and social rights. Now between 19 to 21, what is 19? 19 is about liberty, but it is about political, it is about political liberty, free speech. So 19 doesn't is not about right to marry. 21 on the other hand is about each individual's right to make one's own choices, right to life and liberty. So the answer must be 21. 19, some students may think it is 19, but it is not 19 because 19 talks about political liberty. It's a very easy question. Now focus on this. This is a very, very important question from economy. And this question is a signifier. It marks a trend in UPSC's questioning in economy section. It showcases to us a certain trend in the type of questions that are being asked in UPSC when it comes to economy section. How would you answer a question like this? So what is this question about? It is about Kharif crops in India. This question is about Kharif crops in India and it is talking about the acreage. It is about acreage of all the Kharif crops in India. It is talking about the acreage of various crops. Rice, jowar, oil seeds, cotton, sugarcane, etc. Now, first, why am I focusing on this question? I'm focusing on this question because increasingly in economy, data-based questions, especially in agriculture and trade, they're being given importance. So I've been asking my students, especially keeping in mind the last 2 years, in economy, please make a sheet of all the important data and trends and memorize those things like budget size, fiscal deficit trend, revenue deficit trend, agriculture, food grains, what is the production, what is the area, what is the productivity, what is the crops growth across states, major crop producing states. Likewise, similar data for imports and exports and external sector data like our total external commercial borrowings, the total debt, and also how much foreign exchange do we hold. All these data, please try to have a broad idea because these database questions are being given importance in economy and that will be clear as we look at the next few questions as well. So that data, how do you get this data? To get this, to prepare for this data. But first, we'll come to that issue in a while. But first, let us see, without data, can we answer this question? When you look at this question, many students think, I don't know the data. I'm lost. Let me not attempt this. But can you still attempt this question even if you have not prepared the data for all the crops in India? Just give it a try. Can you still answer this even without the data? Just look at the various options. Of them, which option seems to be definitely wrong? One option seems to be definitely wrong. Look at fourth option. It says area under sugarcane cultivation has steadily decreased. Now, this is not an issue. This doesn't make sense because the government is trying to shift farmers away from sugarcane because sugarcane is a water guzzling crop. It's a water intensive crop, and because of that, government is struggling really hard to take people away from sugarcane, and still government's efforts are not yielding results. So that this statement says that sugarcane's cultivation has steadily decreased. If that were true, there's no need for government to struggle to take farmers away. So 4 seems to be definitely wrong. Now, if 4 is wrong, you have your answer. Just look at the options. If 4 is wrong, you have your answer. Because 4 is there in 3 options, which means the answer is A, 1 and 3. Now, let us say you don't know about sugarcane. Look at option 2. Look at option 2. It says area under the cultivation of jowar is more than that of oil seeds. Now, how can the area under jowar is a millet? It's a coarse cereal or a millet. You must have known that fact. So how can area under area of one millet be more than all the oil seeds put together? It is not one oil seed, it is all the oil seeds. So how can area under one millet be more than that of all oil seeds? Because except rice and wheat, in India, except rice, wheat and sugarcane and maybe cotton, all other crops do not have great acreage. So how can one crop, jowar, a millet, which is not grown extensively in India, how can its area be more than oil seeds? So 2 must be wrong. Now if you can rule out 2, you will again get to your answer because 2 is mentioned in 3 options, B, C and D. So if you can rule out 2, you will again have only one answer, that is 1 and 3. So either ways you will get to this. Now you might have got this answer to this question in the first time. In 19 you must have got answer to this question by common sense and by applying some logic. But if you are a smart student, you will not repeat that for 20. In 20, you will go back and prepare data. So you will prepare data so that if in 20 and 21, a tougher question comes and the options are not in your favor, you will still get it right. So how will you prepare for 2021? So I've been telling students to prepare this basic data. How do you prepare this basic data? For instance, in economic survey, you have 3 tables. Look at these 3 tables. These are very, very important. One, to prepare data, just prepare data on major crops. What all do you prepare for major crops? You will prepare for major crops. What can you prepare? Just prepare things like their production. The first chart that you must know is production of major crops. What is the production? Million tons. Next, you must know the area of each of the crops. Next, the yield of the major crops. Lastly, the production of important crops in the largest state. So in the largest, what are the largest crops that are producing this in the largest state? So what is the state-wise production of these crops? So these 3 tables in the statistical appendix. In economic survey, you have something called as the statistical appendix. So go to the statistical appendix and you don't have to go through the entire thing, but just take the data related to these 3 figures and you'll get these 3 tables. So for the first table is regarding area under major crops. This is about gross area under major crops. They've given trends of all the years. You just have to focus mostly on the most recent years, that is 2019 to 20. So food grains. Now look at food grains. They have given food grains, cereals, and pulses, coarse cereals as well. This is broad categories. Next, they have given for rice. They've given for rice. Now go to the question. What have they asked? Rice area under cultivation is highest for rice. Is it true? If you look at their figure, you will get the answer. For rice, the area under cultivation for Kharif is 39 million hectares. Now, if you look at wheat, because the closest that comes to rice in competition is wheat, and wheat is primarily a rabi crop. So, wheat is even the combined acreage of wheat is only 31.5. Likewise, you have here you have Jowar's acreage. How much is Jowar? Jowar's acreage is 4.7, whereas for oil seeds, how much is it? Oil seeds is 27. Oil seeds is 27. So you can just broadly remember the trends. Broadly remember the trend. Look at sugarcane. This sugarcane's acreage. Clearly, it has decreased from 5.1 to 4.9, 4.4, and then increased to 4.7, increased to 5.1, and again decreased to 4.6. So there is no steady decrease. It is fluctuating. It is fluctuating and depends on the rains and irrigation available in a particular area. So you have to remember this table, at least the broad numbers that comes from this table. That is gross area under major crops. Likewise, you have to remember the production of major crops. What is India's major crops? So how much food grains are we producing? Of that, how much is rice? How much is wheat? How much are we producing oil seeds? Oil seeds, how much is the production? Pulses, what is the production? So you have to remember these broad figures, both the area and next the production, as well as remember the major producers of the crops. For major crops, who are the leading producers? If you look at rice, for example, which states are growing rice? Mostly it is Bengal, UP, and Punjab. For wheat, it is UP, Madhya Pradesh, Punjab. Where do you see oil seeds growing? Here. Where do you see pulses growing? Oil seeds, where do you see? Groundnut especially grows most in Gujarat. Mustard grows most in Rajasthan. Sunflower grows the most in Karnataka. And sugarcane, likewise, where does sugarcane grow? Mostly in UP, Maharashtra. Where does cotton grow? Cotton grows mostly in Gujarat, followed by Telangana and Maharashtra. So these three tables are important for our examination purpose. So please try to remember the data. So the source of our data, one important source of our data is economic survey, statistical appendix, especially these three data. In addition to this, I'm also asking students to at least take annual reports of some important ministries. They publish an annual report. Don't go through the entire report. Just look at the first chapter where they mention the broad important details. For trade details, you can refer to the annual report of Ministry of Commerce. Next, you can also refer to the Department of Industrial Investment, DPIIT, for the data related to FDIs. You can go to the Department of Fisheries for fisheries related details. So, and Food Processing Ministry for food processing sector related details. So, like this, you can get a Ministry of Energy. In addition to agriculture, trade, and fiscal parameters, you must also have some readily available data on energy. What is India's total installed capacity? Of that, how much is thermal? How much is solar? How much is wind? Is solar more or wind is more? Wind used to be more for a while, until recently, and in the last few months, solar overtook wind. Today, solar is more than wind. So, and which states are producing solar the most? Which states are producing wind the most? So, like this, you have to, and what is India's installed nuclear power capacity? So, remember the basic details of India's energy sector details. And also, Side by side, also try to remember our targets. What are our renewable targets? We have a target of 450 gigawatts by 2030. Where are we compared to that? So, agriculture, trade, energy, and fiscal data. At least these four sets of data you have to note and remember, please. So, please work on this data because questions are coming basically from these areas, and you must not feel have a sense of fear and fright when you see a question that is asking you on data. Now look at this next question. It is also based on a similar trend, India's trade scenario. Once again, a question based on trade data. So what is the answer? Are you sure? The answer is vegetable oils. The answer is highest import in terms of value in the last 5 years. Because this, if you look at the options, they are all agricultural imports. The question is basically about agricultural commodities. It is about India's agricultural imports. So, among agricultural commodities, which is the most import sensitive commodity? It is oils, edible oils. That is why government has recently even launched a national mission on oil seeds and oil palm because India imports nearly 60% of its edible oils. 60% of our edible oil consumption is imported, and of the imported edible oil, 60% is just oil palm from Indonesia and Malaysia. So we are not just importing, we are importing two kinds of oils. One, the crude oil, and second, we are also importing edible oil. We are also import dependent on our edible oil, which we use for our roti and other food. So India, that is because after liberalization, what happened is that as incomes began to rise for Indians, Indians increasingly began to go for more higher value food. And oil is traditionally a higher value food. So when people were poor, they used to use oils very sparsely. But as incomes began to rise, they began to consume oil in greater numbers. But our agricultural policy has not responded adequately to this change in dietary patterns. As a result, we do not have enough edible oil acreage in India. And even in India, wherever we have edible oil cultivation there, also the amount of the kind of productivity of oils is very, very low. The productivity of the oil seeds is very low, so we are not getting enough. That's why we are heavily dependent on imports of this. And recently, in the last 1 year, there has been nearly 65 to 70% rise in the prices. That is because this huge rise in prices is because of the global rise in this edible oil. So edible oil is a major issue, and you should remember things like this. So how do you remember data related to imports and exports? So here is the Ministry of Commerce. This is Department of Commerce's annual report 2019-20. This is the Ministry of Commerce annual report. There is a chapter called, I think it is the fourth or third chapter. There is a chapter called Trends in India's Foreign Trade. So you must go to this chapter, just this one chapter. You don't have to look at the whole report. In this one chapter, there are some 3 or 4 tables. This chapter starts at page 25. In that chapter, you have these tables, some 4 or 5 tables. Just these tables are needed for us. So the first table gives us the merchandise trade. How much are India's total? For example, this table tells us How much is the total exports that India had? How much is the total imports we had? And what is the net trade deficit? India has a trade deficit. And what is the total trade deficit? This is in merchandise trade. Likewise, what is the scenario in services? In services, what happens? How much is our exports? How many services do we import? And in service sector, we have a net surplus. We are not deficit. Whereas in merchandise, we are running a deficit. In services, we are running a surplus. So we need to remember this bare minimum data. Next, this is a very, very important table. This is a very, very important table. What does this tell us? It tells us what are India's top 10 export commodities. So when it comes to exports, what are the most important exports that India has? What are the top 10 commodities that India exports? So India refines a lot of crude oil and it uses only some of it. A big chunk of crude oil is exported. So petroleum products, pearl and semi-precious stones. Next, drugs. These are all imported, followed by gold, because India especially imports a lot of gold and diamonds, and these are processed and exported back. Next, you have the commodities like iron and steel, etc., and followed by engineering goods. These are our major exports. Likewise, this other table shows to us the major imports. What are the major imports that India has? What are the major imports of India? So crude oil tops the list, as we know. Crude oil tops the list, followed by gold, precious, semi-precious stones, petroleum products, etc., and so on and so forth. After having an idea of top 10 commodities which we export, top 10 commodities which we import, next we also have to have a broad idea of the destinations. We also need to have a broad idea of the destinations. What are the top 10 export destinations for India? What are the top 10 export destinations for India? So US is the top 10 export destination. Recently, China has beat US. So next we have UAE, followed by China. So these are our three largest export destinations. So with China, we have a very, very deep trade relationship. That's why we can't keep always fighting with China, because though we may have a border dispute, we also have a very important trade relationship with China. So these are the major export countries, export destinations. Likewise, we also have 10 important import sources. From whom do we import? So again, US and China, US, China and UAE. So these three countries form bulk of our trade, both in terms of imports and exports. So UAE, of course, because India imports a lot of crude oil, the Gulf countries must be among the top 10. So you have UAE, followed by Saudi Arabia, followed by Iraq. Iran used to be also on this list, but because of US sanctions, we stopped taking oil from Iran. That's why Iran is out. And Indonesia is also in top 10. If you look at this, Indonesia is also in top 10. From Indonesia, we primarily import edible oil, palm oil that is. Right. So this is how we have to remember data, and this data, like I said, is very important for handling the kind of economic questions which are being asked lately. So please don't have any kind of resistance or phobia towards data. Please have an open-mindedness towards data-based questions. So prepare in this fashion, and then you will be at ease. You will find comfort in handling these sort of questions. Next, look at this question, very interesting question. In S&T. S&T is one topic students again have a lot of resistance. That's why I thought I'll pick up some questions from S&T as well, to show that your resistance is not based on sound logic. What do you think of this question? If you look at this question is actually more of a reading comprehension question rather than any GS based question, because all it calls for is some preliminary information on what is augmented reality and what is virtual reality. If you have even a basic understanding of what these two are, you can answer this question. Clearly, what have they done in the first two options? They have just interchanged words. What they have described for AR actually is about VR. So, what they have described in option 1 suits virtual reality. It is not about augmented reality. And what they have described in second option, that suits virtual reality. So, they have just mixed and matched the words. So, 1 and 2 are definitely wrong, which leaves us with two options, B or C. And clearly, 4 is definitely right. 4 is definitely right based on the option choice. So now it boils down to whether 3 is right or not. What is 3? Augmented reality allows individuals to be present in the world and improves the experience using the camera of smartphone or PC. Perfect. That is what augmented reality is about. Virtual reality takes you to a different world. In augmented reality, a new world is not created. The present, your surroundings are augmented. The experience of that you have of your surroundings is just augmented or elevated. So 3 and 4 are correct. Hence the answer is B. Hence the answer is B, 3 and 4. So many SNT questions are like this. They just scare you with big, big words and heavily worded, big, loaded options. So here, if somebody looks at this question, it looks very long. So students who are slow in reading English may just skip this. But if you can read it quickly and apply some reading comprehension skills, the question immediately seems very, very easy. Next, again, another question, same trend. Another question again based on our trade related information, agricultural trade related information. Again asked in 19. What do you think? Largest exporter of rice in the world. So definitely it has to be China or India, not Myanmar and Vietnam. Between these two, the answer is India. India recently beat China to be the world's largest exporter of rice. So this is something you would know if you are again familiar with the broad trends in agricultural trade. Next, look at this question. Another question from SNT environment where again you have heavy looking options. How will you handle questions like this? So once again, you don't have to know a lot about animal kingdom to answer this question. What is the key word here? Some. Look at the word some. He's saying some. So basically, he's saying the word some is a very interesting word because some species of turtle are herbivores. So it means that even if there is one species which is herbivore, it is true. So probably true. Some species of fish are herbivores. So again some. Even if all the fish are carnivores, if at least one is herbivore, then the option is true. So by using the word some, he's just making it possible for each option to be right. Some species of marine mammals are herbivores. Once again, some. Even if there is one mammal which is herbivore, the option becomes right. Some species of snakes are viviparous. So once again, even if there is one snake which is viviparous, the option seems to be right. So the word some makes it is a inclusive word, which makes it possible for all the options to be correct. So which means the answer is D, 1, 2, 3, 4. So by using the word some, he has made it easy for you. If he uses the word some, extreme words, remember what we said, certain words, extreme words like all, mandatory, none of them, always, some, these words are very much revealing in terms of which option can be right and which option cannot be right. Next we move to the history section. Please look at this question. It is about some persons who have participated actively in the freedom struggle and the positions that they held. So left column is about the leaders, famous people. Right column is about the positions that they held during the freedom struggle. Yes. So how do you answer questions like this? Now, quite often these are not very famous leaders. So some of you may know some and may not know many others. Of these, the easiest to understand is K.C. Niyogi. So you must have heard the word Niyogi a lot of times in Constitutional Assembly. And what is the position? Member, Constituent Assembly. So Niyogi was part of a committee and member Constituent Assembly. Constituent Assembly is a large body, so many people were involved, and somebody like K.C. Niyogi, whose name was quite famous, must have been a member of Constituent Assembly, isn't it? So, two definitely seems to make sense. Two definitely seems to make sense, and that's why we can assume that two is right, which means we are left with option B, option D. 1 is there in both the options. So option 1 must be right. The issue is whether 3 is right or not. The issue is whether 3 is right or not. In this case, 3 is right, which makes it D. Now, you may not know about 3. I'm not saying you should know about 3. So questions like this are difficult, no doubt. I'm not oversimplifying it. But let us say you got this question wrong in 19 or you did not answer this question in 19. What will you do? When you're preparing for the examination in 20, now you will focus on this question. When you're focusing in 20, you'll focus on this 19 question and you'll now read upon who is Tej Bahadur Sapru, who is K.C. Niyogi, who is P.C. Joshi. So the unknowns of the previous year questions should now be researched on. You should now make it a point to research and read upon these people. And you must now shift those people or add those people into your known area. Shift them from unknown domain to known domain. They must become part of your working knowledge of modern India. You must have not known them in 19, but even if one of them appears in 20 or 21, you should not miss it. Read up about these three people. Next, why did you not know about Tej Bahadur Sapru? He seems to be president of All India Liberal Federation. So read up about this All India Liberal Federation. See what is this organization about. See who are the members other than Sapru. Next, you didn't know that P.C. Joshi was General Secretary about Communist Party of India. So read up about who were the active communist leaders in India. So, based on this question, you must read up about the whole contribution of liberals to the freedom struggle. You must read up about the role of communists in freedom struggle, and you must remember the other communist leaders apart from P.C. Joshi, so that even if one of them is asked the next year again, you should not miss. That is how you prepare. So previous questions should be prepared like this. Don't just prepare them for the sake of doing it. Using them as a base, you must cover a broad range. So Tej Bahadur Sapru must become the basis for preparing on liberals. P.C. Joshi must become the basis for preparing on communists. Not just these. This is how you must prepare every other question in history, modern India. What are the different streams in modern Indian struggle? Communists, who are communists, socialists, Congress Socialist Party, who are liberals, who are part of Forward Bloc, who are part of Muslim League, who were part of the revolutionaries, which leaders contributed to the freedom struggle from outside India, who were in North America, who were in Europe. So, in this fashion, you should try to understand and try to get a broad spectrum view of the different streams of national struggle as well as the different persons, different leaders who took a part in this, different prominent people who played a part of these multiple streams. And if still a question, it is still likely that a question can come, like N.M. Lokande, who we discussed in the previous session on 18th or on 11th, who we discussed on 11th. So if N.M. Lokande, you don't know about N.M. Lokande until then, but that question should now make you read up on N.M. Lokande, read up on trade union movement, and N.M. Lokande should now become the part of your working memory when it comes to modern India. This is how you can use previous questions to expand and deepen your existing knowledge so that your knowledge system, whatever more layers you're adding to the knowledge system, if you add them in this fashion, the knowledge system will be in alignment with the examination's demands. If your knowledge system is being built based on some test series, that test series may not be in perfect alignment with UPSC prelims. But if your knowledge system is developed based on UPSC previous questions, then the knowledge system will most likely be in alignment with the examination. That is the reason why I am time and again emphasizing previous questions more than even in many test series. Next, let us quickly look at the next two questions and close today's session, please. So look at this question. This is from geography. It is very similar to what we discussed in the earlier session. In geography, a lot of questions are coming from map, and there many questions are coming in the map from a similar area. So identify these areas. Mediterranean Sea is one place. Red Sea is another area where they're focusing. Then which countries does equator pass? Through which countries does Tropic of Cancer pass? Through which countries does Tropic of Capricorn pass? Through which states in India does Tropic of Cancer pass? Through which states does IST pass? So these are all questions which have appeared in the previous year as well. We have discussed in the last session how the alignment of major Indian cities was asked. So what do you think about this question? Which option is clearly wrong of the five? This is clearly wrong because Syria doesn't lie towards Red Sea. Red Sea is towards the Persian Gulf. It is below between Egypt and the Arabian Peninsula, but Syria is towards the Mediterranean coast. So Syria, Red Sea is definitely wrong. So 5 is wrong. If you can rule out 5, C and D are gone. C and D are gone. Now you are left with A and B. In A and B, 1 and 4 are right, which means 1, 4 are definitely right. Now the choice is between 2 and 3. You definitely know that Caspian Sea, or may the major republics in the Central Asian republics are around Caspian Sea, and Kazakhstan has a lot of hydrocarbon reserves along the Caspian Sea. So Kazakhstan is towards Caspian Sea, which makes the answer B. Next, this is another very interesting question. Please look at this. What do you think of the 4 states? Which states has the least? It is about ascending order of forest cover. So, which state would have the least, and which state would have the most? So, now how do you answer this question? Very simple logic. If a state has a lot of forest cover, it means it must be the least urbanized. The most urbanized states will have the least forest cover. The less urbanized states will have the highest forest cover. So northeast states have a lot of forest cover because they are very less urbanized. Likewise, the Himalayan states of Uttarakhand, Himachal, Jammu Kashmir, they also have very high forest cover because they are very less urbanized. So the level of urbanization is inversely proportional to the forest cover. Now, of the 4 states, which state has the most urbanization? It is Maharashtra. Maharashtra is most urbanized of the 4. If Maharashtra is the most urbanized, it must have least forest cover of the 4, which means the first least state must be Maharashtra. So the correct answer must begin with 3. Now, if you look at the options, which options have 3 at the first? C and D. So C and D have 3 at the beginning. So it must be C or D. Now, of these two, next, which state of these, which has of these two options, which has the highest forest cover according to them? In one option, Chhattisgarh has highest forest cover. Another option, Odisha has highest forest cover. Now, if we can examine and if we can see which of these 2 states has the highest forest cover, is it Chhattisgarh or is it Odisha? We can get our answer, isn't it? If we can determine between Chhattisgarh and Odisha, which state has the highest forest cover, we know our answer. Now, between these 2 states, which state do you think is more urbanized? It is Odisha. Odisha has many cities like Bhubaneswar, Cuttack. Rourkela, but Chhattisgarh even has Bastar region, which is Naxal operated. So if the state is so much full of Naxals and has lot of forest area, lot of forest Naxal, if Naxals have operate, there must be good amount of forest cover. And between Chhattisgarh and Odisha, Odisha is relatively developed compared to Chhattisgarh because of coastline and because of steel plants and because of multiple other cities. So Odisha is more urbanized, which means Chhattisgarh must be less urbanized than Odisha. Hence, Chhattisgarh has more forest cover. So, which option has 3 at the first and 1 at the last? The option is C. So, once again, we get our answer. So, see how we have taken forest cover and how we have related forest cover with urbanization, and using that we arrived at the answer. So, urbanization was nowhere given in the options, but we have generated a criteria, we have developed a logic based on our existing knowledge, and through that logic we answered this question. That is exactly what I'm talking about. That's the kind of skill we must all develop to handle this type of questions. And this is the last question of the day in 2019, people. So this question is about CAMPA, Compensatory Forest Management and Planning Act. So the first option is saying there must be a CAMPA, an authority at national and state levels. What do you think? Now, definitely, India is a federal state. So whenever they set up certain authority structures, there will be one authority at center and other at state. And this is all the more needed for something like forestry, because state has a very important role in implementing forestry projects. So one seems to be right. It doesn't come across as definitely wrong. Look at option 2. Option 2 is saying people's participation is mandatory. Now this is an extreme word. How can you mandate, how can you make it compulsory for people to participate in compensatory forestation programs? That is clearly not at all making sense. How can you force people to participate? People can do so if they voluntarily want. So two is definitely wrong, and one doesn't seem to make so much. One seems to broadly make sense. If you're setting up a new authority, there must be one authority at state level, and there must be another higher authority at an all India level. So one seems to be right, and two definitely wrong. So the answer is one only, A. So this is how we can answer these type of questions, and this is the trend we have seen in 13. In 1920, what we have seen is that one, in economy, they're moving more towards data-based questions, more towards trends. The other trend, important trend that we are talking in history, which you have just mentioned, which we will continue in the next session, is that in history, there is first an overall importance given to history section, and in history, the larger importance is being given to medieval India. We are seeing so much more importance being given to medieval India in history. So medieval India is assuming a lot of importance, medieval and ancient India. And we will discuss in the next session how we can handle history, and we will also discuss other latest trends which we can arrive at based on 19 and 20 papers, along with discussing 20th paper, 20 paper in the next and final session. So we'll meet next Saturday, and with that, we will close these sessions where prelim strategy is being, we are trying to have some idea, have some broad command over prelims approach. So let us conclude today's session, and we will meet again next Saturday at 8 o'clock and close this series.